Hello and welcome to Scholars to Storytellers, where we help senior academics in the humanities and social sciences go from concept to trade book success, or at least to an agent-ready proposal in 9 months or less. My name is John Gazvinian. I'm the founding director of Scholars to Storytellers. And today I want to talk to you about what I think is a very important subject, your biggest enemy. This is going to be kind of a big picture, abstract kind of conversation, but an important one. This is one about mentality. As you know, if you follow this channel, a lot of times we talk about specific techniques. This is one that's more about a mentality shift that I think is very important to make. It's the number one thing that I've seen hold people back. Over 20 years of watching academic colleagues want to, but not quite manage to publish a trade book, to get out there and get their work in front of a general audience. The number one thing that I've seen standing in their way is fear. Yes, I know this seems really cliche, but it's actually true. There is nothing that I have seen that more consistently prevents people from actually achieving trade book success when they're coming from academia than fear. This is a problem that I think is particularly endemic to academia. So let me break this down and say a bit more about what I mean. I think there are four types of fear when it comes to academics trying to make the transition to writing a trade book. Here they are in no particular order. Fear of judgment from colleagues, fear of failure, fear of doing a disservice to your subject, and fear of the mercilessness of the public sphere. So let me break each of these four down in turn and say what we can do about them. Let's start with fear. Well, let me first say I get it. Let me take a moment and actually show some real empathy for this, because I really do understand all four of these types of fears. I've been there with all four of them, sometimes still am. So it's important to just acknowledge that and allow yourself to admit, this is the hardest thing for a lot of academics, admit that you are a little bit afraid to make this transition, to do this completely new thing that you've never done before. And why shouldn't you be? Anytime we try to do something completely new, it can be kind of scary. So that's okay. I know sometimes we develop a tough shell in academia, but I think it's important to acknowledge that this is kind of a little bit scary. It's a whole new kind of world, right? So I'm very sympathetic to that. But let's break each of these down in turn. Let's start with fear of judgment, fear of the judgment of your colleagues, right? This is very common and it's completely understandable. Why wouldn't you be? You've spent God knows how many years in academia constantly hearing the critiques of your colleagues, anonymous peer reviewers, people at conferences and at presentations, at papers, making little nitpicky critiques, the backbiting, the kind of the things people say behind your back. Of course, you're human. You're going to be sensitive to that. And so when you do trade, of course, you're much more in the spotlight. You now have this kind of special kind of commercial success that maybe some of your colleagues don't. And of course, yes, you're going to probably hear, you may not hear it directly, but you're going to be the subject of probably more judgment than ever. First of all, take a deep breath, recognize this for what it is, which is usually jealousy and sour grapes. This is something no one will ever admit, but I have seen this again, again, and again, where an academic, achieves great commercial success with a big trade book, and suddenly it's just interesting that this person who was very well respected in their field before and is still pretty well respected, suddenly when you bring up their name in conversation, you hear these like, well, that book, it was, and the question is, well, what? Like, what was wrong with that book exactly, right? And oftentimes people who say things like that, who strike that tone, have a very hard time really articulating what's wrong with the book, other than the fact that a lot of people are reading it. And you see this in snippy reviews and all that kind of stuff, right? I have no real solution to that. I mean, other than just like you have to sort of not care. But if to help you kind of not care, what I would remind you of is that those kinds of colleagues, the people who will make those kinds of snippy comments, they're going to judge you anyway. In fact, they probably already are. And they've probably been doing that your entire career. Those are the people who are going to make those comments, right? And you can probably imagine someone like that in your field, that nemesis you've had for many, many years who, sure, when you get your trade book out, they're going to be even more snide and snippy behind your back, or to your face, perhaps. Just remember, you're not writing for them. You're writing for everyone else and yourself, most importantly. And thirdly, you're writing for colleagues who are actually kind and decent and supportive, and again, you're writing for the public sphere. That's your audience, not people who are always looking to bring you down anyway, no matter what you do. So try to remember that they would have judged you anyway. They would have found something to say. And now you're just giving them more, um, more to sink their teeth into. And you know what? Good. That's my fourth point on this one. At least if they're going to do that anyway, give them a reason. I'm reminded of that old song, let's give them something to talk about, right? That is the attitude you should take. That kind of carefree, yeah, good, fine, go ahead. Let's give them something to actually talk about. Fine, you want to make snippy comments? Okay, here's some actual trade book success that I'm having. So go ahead and make the comments that you want to make. All right. Again, this takes a certain mentality shift, but it's in you. It really, really is. Let's talk about fear number 2, the fear of failure. This is a very legitimate one. This is, but one people don't always admit, but I hear it between the lines when I'm talking to potentially like new clients and things like the people who are thinking about doing this. Well, what if I try to do a trade book and I just fail? Like, I don't know. I don't want to, like, what if I go out there and I can't get an agent? Or maybe I get an agent, but then they can't sell the book. And now I've just wasted, quote unquote, a year or two of my life or 6 months of my life or whatever it might be. Doesn't even have to be that much, honestly. Remember, all you're doing is putting together a writing sample and a book proposal. I've had clients who have done that in 3 months. Okay, first of all, you're not actually wasting that much time. But let's say you take a bit longer. Oh, I could have been doing other things at that time. What if I do this and I just fail? A couple of things. First of all, before I get to my little bullet points here, let's just remember one of the things that surprised me the most in doing the work that I do is that some of my happiest clients are the ones who don't actually succeed at getting an agent and a book deal. And I want you to hear that because that was strange to me when it first happened, first couple of times. And now I really get it because what they always say to me is, no, you don't understand. This book is so much better than it would have been otherwise. It now reads well. It has a good framing, good conceptualization. I feel like, I can give it to my mother and she's actually going to understand it. Like it's a good book. Fine. So it's published by UNC Press. Is that such a horrible thing? That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing is a bigger point, which is to remember that this fear of failure is actually a product of the education system. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you are a successful academic, and most of you listening to the sound of my voice are successful academics, chances are you were very good at school, primary school, secondary school, high school, whatever. And then you were good at undergrad, and then you were good at grad school, and then you need to be fundamentally good at school to get ahead in this world, right? And what makes you good at school? What does school reward? Getting the right answer, never getting the wrong answer, right? How many marks you can get out of 100, right? How many points you can get. And people who are good at that, people who are good at like scraping more points out of the essay or out of the exam because they got this right and that right and crossed their T's and dotted their I's, they end up doing really well. And they do well as undergrads, and then they get interested in grad school and so on and so forth. And then what happens in academia? It just reinforces that mentality that you can never make a mistake, right? Because you go out to peer review, you go out to conferences, you present your papers, and what happens? People nitpick these little points, right? And then you're always looking over your shoulder and worrying about failing. Completely fine. That mentality, that perfectionism, that thoroughness is fantastic. You have cultivated that over 20, 30 years, and it is exactly what has got you here. It is exactly what has made you a successful academic, and that's great. But you're allowed to relax a little bit now. You're a tenured professor, or maybe you will be soon. This was the whole point, was that you could get to a point where you could breathe and relax, and yeah, maybe even fail a little bit, because that's what else is tenure for if not that, right? I mean, it's for other things too, but that is one of the great things about being at this point that hopefully you're at. And ask yourself, what actually will happen if I fail at this? Let's say I go out there, I don't get an agent or I don't get a big book deal, whatever. What's the worst that's happened? You still have your job. It's a very good job. You're tenured, I hope. If not, that's a different story. But even if you're not, honestly, like you're still probably fine. You're not about to get sacked. You make a decent income. You got a whole bunch of books out. You're very respected in your field. And no one even needs to know that you went out there and tried to do a trade book if you're really that worried about it. The worst thing is that you wasted a bit of your time. But we already talked about that. And I promise you, the book is probably a lot better for it, even if it ends up being published by another academic press, which, by the way, is not exactly failure. If you told most people in your life who are not academics, I just had a new book come out, my 4th book just came out, and it's done well and my field respects it, so I feel like a failure because of that, they look at you like you're crazy. That is not failure. Okay? Not being published by Random House is not failure. So try to remember that when you set out on this path. Let's talk about another fear of disservice to your subject. This is a powerful one. I understand this. The amount of energy and work that it takes to in those archives and that field work to get these, the amount of time it took to get that one specific point. And, then you have to kind of elide over it in a trade book, or maybe it gets relegated to the footnotes, or maybe you just, by being too tradey, you're being too sensationalistic somehow. You're oversimplifying your subject. I understand that completely. We all care very, very much about our subjects. I have to ask you to trust that this will not, first of all, that this will not be the only place you get to write about this subject. You can still do academic journal articles. Footnotes exist. You can still relegate some of those more arcane points to your footnotes for your colleagues. But if you try to shove all of that into your writing because you're so afraid of getting the slightest thing wrong, that level of excessive detail and those qualifying statements, to be sure, one would not want to push this point too much, but, we know those phrases, right, from academia. Those are deadening to good writing. That, I actually think, is a much bigger thing to be afraid of. That you're going to sound boring, rather than somehow you're going to do disservice to your subject. You're very unlikely to, frankly, at this point in your career. You've grown up a bit. You've done some things. You know some things. You're probably not going to just be slippery and sensationalistic with the facts of your subject. Finally, let's talk about the fear of the public sphere. This is a very legitimate one, right? The trolling, the insults, the social media fights that you may not be mentally, emotionally, spiritually ready for. I understand that completely. It's a very understandable fear. We do live in a highly politicized time where people troll one another all the time. And I'm not talking about your colleagues. I'm just talking about the public now, right? And I'm here to tell you, it may even be worse than you think. It may come from unlikely directions. You probably are worried about being trolled by these kind of right-wing MAGA kind of crazies, on X or, whatever, or Truth Social or whatever. Let me tell you, actually, you may be surprised to find how much you get trolled and insulted and fought with and nitpicked from the other direction when you do a trade book. The ideologically purist graduate students and junior scholars and activists of various stripes who think that you've, quote, sold out, or that you haven't been, you're too, quote unquote, even-handed, and that you're both sidesing things and all that kind of stuff. Look, fundamentally, I don't know what else to say with this one, but you simply have to not care. Some deep, deep part of you needs to learn not to care. And remember this. If this subject is big enough, exciting enough, important enough that you want to go out there and do a trade book, then it's big enough and exciting enough and important enough that, it's going to get people worked up. We live in a highly political environment where everything is political. And if it's important enough for trade, then it's probably going to get politicized and people are going to get angry at you. And that's fine. You have to not care. You're at this point in your life where some deep, deep spiritual part of you has to really ask yourself, why do I care what these people think? Are they paying my rent? Are they responsible for my, my tenure file, my promotion, anything really? You've earned this right. So the simple solution to all of this, as you can probably tell, is be fearless. Be fearless. Now, I know that sounds easy to say. It sounds really cheesy, but I'm serious about this. This is your time. You've paid your dues. It's your life. It's your work. You have worked so many years to get to the point where you can say what you want because people trust that you're going to be responsible with your subject matter, because you will be. I trust that you will be. So don't let these things get in your way. Most importantly, being fearless, and I really want you to hear this, will make the work better. It's not just that it'll make you more likely to succeed, or it'll get out of your own way and out of your own head and you're able to actually do this. No, it's actually more important than that. The work will be better if it's a little bit fearless. I actually encourage my clients to be a little bit reckless sometimes in a good way. And that always makes them go, oh, but, within reason. Because I trust you guys. Senior academics are never going to be overly reckless with their subject matter. I know that. You're much more likely to have the opposite problem, being too careful, second-guessing yourself, being too cautious. And if there's anything I want to leave you with, is this. Careful writing is bad writing. Let me say that again. Careful writing is bad writing. That, more than anything else, is your reason to be a little bit fearless, because it will show in the writing. Your writing will be it will be inspirational, it'll be much more meaningful, it'll be much more personal, it'll come much more from the soul. That's what we want, and that's what agents want, it's what publishers want, it's what the reading public wants. We don't want to hear a bunch of people pulling their punches and being overly careful about everything they're saying. That's fine in academia, but in trade, you've got to remember that careful writing is bad writing. So that's it. If you want to find out more, of course, as always, check us out here, www.scholarstostorytellers.com, or send me an email, john@scholarstorytellers.com. Hope to see you soon. Thanks.